Hello, fellow Nostriches. So I've been active in Silicon Valley for over 20 years, and from time to time I'm hanging around with friends at parties. The topic of Nostr comes up because I'm fully Nostr obsessed. And when it happens, most of the Silicon Valley tech people haven't really tuned in to what's going on here. And so I often invite old friends over, and we have a little jam session where we talk and catch up in general. But then we talk a lot about Nostr, and I share my excitement and try to get their perspective from the ground up learning about this new technology. In this episode, I invited Yanda Erlich over. He's a good friend who I met at Google about 20 years ago. And he has been involved after Google as a startup entrepreneur and founder, as a venture capitalist. And he now works as an executive at an AI company. He's been fully obsessed with AI for years. And so we talk a lot about AI, and we talk about GPTs and their ability to disrupt what Google is doing. Then I give him the rundown on Nostr and how it works and why I'm excited about it. And we finish up with a little bit of predictions of the future and experiences with self-driving cars. So this is a great episode, talks about a wide range of topics around technology, but definitely gets the Nostr story into new hands and new perspective. And so I hope you listen and enjoy what you hear. Yeah, so you're asking me what I'm doing. So I'm making a lot of videos these days.
Nice.
And
I like it. Yeah, I saw some of them on Twitter, I think.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been sharing on Twitter. I actually just set it up as an official audio podcast for the
fancy.
Nostr Talks stuff.
Cool. On like Spotify and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Nice.
It's like, I don't know if you ever mess around with that stuff, but like the open ecosystem is just a huge mess.
Oh, really?
You know, I mean, like,
yeah.
open is beautiful, but then open's also like,
Yeah.
you know, it's not like upload the video on YouTube and everybody just has a link. It's like, oh, I accidentally launched like 2 copies of the podcast on Spotify and had to write to them and ask them to take one of them down.
Wasn't that like, I feel like Phil Kaplan, like he had some startup that like let you, you know, back in the day, like publish all of these things.
Yeah, it's called DistroKid.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's like the go-to in the music industry.
Or like did you use that for your podcast or no?
I haven't. I think of it as like a music industry thing.
Okay.
And it may be that it's more geared toward that. So I was listening to some music industry podcast, and that's like the go-to that everybody in the music industry uses.
Oh, interesting.
Which is kind of cool.
That's pretty badass.
Yeah. And he like starts everything just, by himself with Cold Fusion, which he learned like 25 years ago.
It's badass.
Everything he builds is Cold Fusion.
Totally.
One man band kind of thing.
Yeah. It's so cool.
But it's a real company. I think I don't know how, I'm guessing it's still doing well. I think in the, a year or two ago, they raised money at like a $1+ billion valuation.
Yeah.
Maybe that means it's only worth 200 million today. I don't know. But
Indeed. Who didn't? And then you're doing this Nostr stuff, which you're going to teach me about because I know nothing about it.
Yeah. So the Nostr stuff is kind of, I'd say,
I didn't even know how to pronounce it.
that's become, well, I think there's like, it's, it's open source, it's free, public domain. So, nobody really controls it. But the Nostr stuff, I've kind of just been spending all my time on it because I'm, I think when these new things happen, to me, it feels a little bit like the Bitcoin moment when, I know you and I were kind of learning about that early
at the
together.
same time. Yeah, exactly.
And actually, I'm curious, as part of that, sort of how I think if we can project back to what our thinking felt like back then,
totally,
and figure out like what did we believe and what did we not believe and what were concerns. That's how that played out, because that's been, I don't know, it was 10+ years ago, I think, when we were first.
Yeah, 20. I want to say I bought my first Bitcoin in probably like early 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, almost 10 years now.
Right.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I still own that Bitcoin.
I remember like we were all running around town and, hosting like dinner parties and meetups, and everybody was kind of Bitcoin crazy trying to figure this out. And then it felt like it kind of just died down for many years.
Yep.
In Silicon Valley, like it's obviously continued to sort of.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I feel like it started out with Bitcoin. Then it was like Ethereum, and then there was this explosion of like ICO. You remember the ICO craze,
ICO
right?
Craze, yeah.
And then I think when that kind of flattened, a bunch of people went home, and then some people stayed, and then there was like another craze around kind of just like asset values.
Mm-hmm.
And then
it was sort of like that ICO thing was like that 2017.
Before COVID, yeah. So 2016, 2017, I remember. And then I feel like right around that time, I kind of convinced myself like, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. Like, none of this other stuff really matters.
Right.
And then that really died down. And I remember like when I joined Kotu early on, like, most of the other folks there were like, this is like this, what is this funny money stuff, right?
What was their attitude on the whole sector?
On the whole, on all of crypto was just kind of like, this seems like totally speculative and crazy. And then like post-COVID, maybe 2021, like kind of the world started to invest in these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was like that second hype cycle where like Bitcoin valuation rose to like, I forget, like 60, 70,000. Ethereum was up really high.
Mm-hmm.
People were investing again, like not in ICOs, but in all these like crypto assets and like NFTs and all this other stuff. And now it feels like that, like we're back in winter-ish. Maybe that winter happened like 6 months ago, and now we're like kind of clawing out of the winter. But I feel like all these people who own these like apes and cats and stuff are like, oh no, these are just GIFs. No.
I'm guessing you haven't, unless you're really keeping an eye on this. I'm guessing you haven't run into inscriptions and ordinals.
No, I've heard, like I saw ordinals in passing, and I was like, I don't even know what this is anymore. Like I've shifted all my attention to AI, and so like I still hold Bitcoin. I have some ETH, but I feel like my knowledge of the space kind of froze. Maybe 2020, 2021 or something like that. And so like what was hot then, like I kind of know, and then like nothing else.
So this is interesting though. So you sort of self-identify as a Bitcoin maximalist, but you also own some ETH. So how does,
just because I like it, well, I think I bought ETH in 2015, and then I have this like crazy like distributed, like my paper wallet's like chopped up in pieces and it's like spread all over the place. And so it's actually like too much effort to sell the ETH. Like, occasionally I'm like, oh, I should sell my ETH and buy more Bitcoin. I'm like, yeah, that seems like too much work. Like, screw it. Like it's fine. Right. So it's like, I own it because
like
it's
an accident.
Yeah. It's like, I can't like, like a 2015 purchase that I haven't like, I think I like converted, I think like 1 BTC into ETH at the time. It was like 2015, 2016 or something like that.
Right.
I think on Lucas Ryan's recommendation back in the day. It's like, I still own whatever ETH I got from that conversion. And no more, no less. Like, it's like, that's the end of it. So,
right. Yeah. And sort of where's your head then on the whole space? Like, it sounds like the Kotu people were all like, thought it was
pretty bullish on it. And now I think they were certainly like right around the time I left to join Weights and Biases, like people were pretty hot on crypto and investing in like companies that invest in crypto and tokens themselves. I honestly, like my opinion is like kind of frozen where it was in 2020, which is like, I still believe in the long-term value of Bitcoin, but I haven't revisited that like thought, right?
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, well, people think gold is valuable. This seems like it should be like more valuable than gold. Like that makes kind of sense, right? I think still kind of like generally skeptical on like all these other crypto assets. And then I haven't followed all the new developments. And I think I like maybe the one thing that's evolved, and again, this is not a deeply like thought thesis, but the more I've gotten into AI, the more I wonder like maybe crypto is not for us. Right? In the sense that like I don't really necessarily need to buy things with Bitcoin. Like I live in meat space, there's dollars, they seem to work fine, whatever, right? But like in a world where there's like intelligent agents or like semi-autonomous agents that like can do things, like they're going to need to buy compute and electricity and, storage space and whatever. Right. And so, like this idea of, like I remember I feel like Filecoin came out and I was like, this seems ridiculous. It's just like a worse version of AWS. Like why would I need to store my shit in Filecoin when I can just store it in AWS? Yeah. But what if it's not for me? It's like for some agent that like actually needs to transact in some way so they can store its own, like it can store its memories in it or something, like whatever, right? Yeah. And then like in that point, like, something where that autonomous agent can transact in some currency that's like native to it.
Yep.
And I think in like 2017, that seemed ridiculous because AI like just wasn't ready, right? Like I think like it like the idea of kind of like some kind of like semi-AGI-ish thing seemed so far away that it was just like, this is ridiculous. Right. People are just making like worse services for humans. But now, like strangely, I think as AI is starting, like, the ChatGPT stuff and Stable and all these things are starting to look like, well, I don't know, like AGI, like it could still be 30 years away and we're, again, fooling ourselves by how close it, but like it kind of feels different. It really does feel different in terms of like the readiness of this stuff. that like now you pull back all of these things about like, well, if these things are going to like operate in some world, they're going to need some currency, and like maybe that's the,
yeah,
the stuff could be valuable again.
You're getting dangerously close to my
nice.
enthusiasm.
Okay, cool. Okay,
Nostr.
awesome. Awesome. Sweet. All right, cool.
Well,
not knowing anything about it, it's just kind of awesome.
I don't want to divert from the AI because I actually want to talk to you about AI, given that you've sort of been, an enthusiastic, let's say, investor, follower, practitioner for way longer than it's been super in vogue to be so.
Before it was cool.
Yeah, before it was cool.
long before it was cool. I was joking. We had this dinner for a couple of like prospects and customers and all this stuff, and people went around the table and asking folks, why they were excited in AI. And I remember I was reading AI books when I was like 12 or 13 years old,
right,
in like the early 80s, and getting like super stoked about this stuff. And my dad, who had been a software engineer since like the 50s or something, was like, like don't waste your time on this shit. It's always 5 years away,
Right.
And he was right for 30 years.
Yeah.
Like I would keep like popping into it, being like, oh, is it ready now? No, it's still like expert systems. No, this thing, like, happiness engines in 2013, like epic fail, like AI doesn't work. Right. And now I kind of feel like, oh man, this time it, like, again, we don't know. Right. Yeah. And like you see some of these like Bing mishaps and all this other stuff. Like it could be, again, where it's like we have these high hopes and we're going to be let down and it's going to go into another AI winter, et cetera. But somehow that doesn't feel like that's what's going to happen. Yeah. Like it feels different. It feels more real, more tangible. I put ChatGPT on my home screen now on my phone. And often when I'm like tempted to ask like a search style question, I'll go to it first before a search engine. And I don't know. It doesn't feel like I'm having a conversation with you, but it kind of feels like I'm having a conversation with like a 8-year-old. I'm like, man, that's really impressive.
Yeah,
that's a really smart.
Are you going to it out of like an instinct or like curiosity to try it versus like, do you have like an ingrained habit that it's just like what you want or what serves your need better?
It started out as curiosity. But then I think the modality is also different, right? Like in some sense, it like gives you the cliff notes of web searches, right? Yep. And so especially when you're on your phone and you just kind of want the answer for something, it's better. Like I was having a conversation with a friend about like I practice Olympic weightlifting as my form of gym, which it doesn't show, but never mind. But I was chatting with a friend and he was like, oh, why that versus weightlifting? Just like, bench presses and stuff like this. And I was like, oh, let me think of a cogent response for him. And I just opened up ChatGPT and I was like, give me the 3 positives and 3 negatives of Olympic weightlifting over like traditional weightlifting as a form of exercise. And it printed out this thing that was like, oh yeah, this is like better than what I could have described it at. It was like, oh, it gives you flexibility and power and all this. It was like, I forget exactly the thing, but I was just like, oh man, this is like, it's doing a better, if I could just read this, like I feel more convinced than like what I could have come up in my head. And I feel like if I put that search query into Google, which I love and we work there, et cetera, it would give me a bunch of links of stuff that I would have to read and do that summarization myself.
Right.
And, like that's a different modality for kind of like information exploration. Like I kind of like the idea of like, oh, like pre-chew this stuff for me so I can like spit it out to my friend and we can get back to our day. Right. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome. So.
Yeah. And so like you've sort of talked about how, maybe it was way too early, 50 years ago, 30 years ago. And then I think even until very recently, I think a lot of people have
Transformers really changed it, I think.
But even, really Transformers, I think the paper was 5 years ago. Was it
but it wasn't really implemented. It was written about, right? And then like, this is, I feel like, as a Zoogler, like the big miss, right? It was like, it was implemented and then Google has an implementation of it internally that just never released, right? Like they use it themselves and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's like, okay, cool for you guys. Well,
but I mean, is that not maybe a good strategic move?
I don't think so. I mean, in some sense that like, I'm a big believer that like, unless you cannibalize yourself, like someone else will cannibalize you. And I think that seems to be happening, right? Like OpenAI is happening. And like, it's always scary to cannibalize yourself because like they built this like massive business off of web search the way it's traditionally done. But I think it created this opening for Bing and for OpenAI and et cetera to like basically attack the jewels, right? In some sense.
So are you like a fan or like a optimist that the Bing OpenAI kind of integration is the future of search? Like, is that kind of, you're convinced of that, or you're kind of open to it?
I think, well, let me put it this way. I think search, the search paradigm that was invented by Google is under threat for sure. There's no doubt about it, right? Like, is Bing the right answer? Like, I don't know, right? Too early to tell. But I do think that like search 10 years from now will not look like search 5 years ago. There's no way that makes any sense, right? Like there's like this entity that can summarize things for you. That's pretty powerful. Like it's actually, it's like a really interesting modality. And obviously like that completely like decimates the business model, right? Because the business model is driven off of like, no, you don't actually spend, like, I remember Google, like one of the metrics was like how little time you spent on the search results page, so you could click onto the thing, get your data. But like maybe now that's not what you want, right? Like the result might be the result, you know, and then it's like, well, how does advertising work in that model? And, you know, how do you make your economic rents off that model? And all, like all this stuff is like really challenging. And my guess is that like Google's full of really smart people, so they've probably been thinking about this stuff for much longer than I have. But like I do think that like this idea of like not just processing you like the direct feed of like what the internet has to offer, but like pre-chewing it for you. Like I think that has appeal to like a lot of people who just like, I mean, in some sense, it's like, oh, what are the top 3 cameras I want to buy? Like, I don't want to read 20 links. I just want to list. It's like, oh, here's 10 cameras, choose 3, right? It's like, okay, like that's how you would, like, if I asked you, you know, like what top 3 cameras, you wouldn't give me like a binder full of data. You'd like, read this. You know? It's like, no, like you'd be like, oh, I like these 5 and like these other 2 are kind of interesting. Like play with those and pick your favorite 3 are probably fine. Right. It's like, well.
But it is nice to be able to know, like, to sort of evaluate the source from which that information came, right?
So like I think so, but like
to have it as a backup, not necessarily as the front kind of entry point to the information.
I think it's nice to do it, right? In the sense of like, yeah, it's good to know that was there, right? Because like also, certainly like right now these kind of transformers like hallucinate and so like, you know, I don't know if you've done this, but if you know, do you. You know, one of the things that you can do in ChatGPT is like, who is David King ? Right? And it's just like invents a story. You know, like either it doesn't know who you are, or if like you give it enough description, it'll like literally invent shit about you. It's kind of amazing. Like I think I went to Harvard Medical School or something. It's just like awesome. Like don't want me operating on anyone, right? So yeah, I think showing your work is interesting, but like in some sense, like, you know, early on I did undergrad research, and you have all the citations, right? Like at the end of the paper. You read all those citations? Like I didn't, you know? Like I think some people do, right? And it's like nice that they're there in case you're like, oh, I'm gonna like spot check this thing. But I didn't, you know, I didn't like follow every fucking like subnote and be like, okay, let me read this paper and that paper and this other stuff. I just kind of assume that the person did a good job summarizing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I don't want the binder full of information, or I don't want to read all the web pages and decide for myself. I think my ideal interface is like something like a GPT ChatGPT style interface, but where
with links
I can also tell like, oh, this was, you know, 80% composed by information we found on this website, and, you know, 15% composed by information we found on this site. And then like, you know, a long tail of, you know, 0.01. This grammar came from this other random thing.
That's right. Or like, you know, like the McKinsey decks that have like the source links on each slide. It's like this graph came from this like data set, and this graph came from this thing. But like you still want to see the graph that's been like kind of like pre-analyzed for you.
And Google kind of has this, like, so I agree, back when we were there, they had this like goal to get you off the site and onto the web page.
That's right.
And with, you know, one boxes and kind of the knowledge graph and stuff, a lot more of the information actually is on the website now. So
I would say like so. Okay. Right. I mean,
but there's some queries I'll make where it'll have like a summarized answer, and it'll have the link to where it comes.
That's true.
From. But then when I click on that, I read the thing, I'm like, oh, it kind of didn't really get it right, which is helpful to be able to both see what it thinks the thing is, but then to be able to further investigate.
I think the challenge is that summarized answer only comes from one link. I don't know if you've noticed that, right? Like it's always like, oh, it's like, oh, the top 3. I don't know. What was I looking for recently? something. I was like, I think men's like waterproof hiking shoes or something like that, right? And it gave me that summary with like a list, right, off of a link. And I was just like, I don't know if I trust this source.
Right.
And there's a bunch of other links to other stuff. And I was like, okay, well, now I'm back to like clicking on 20 things to find the thing. And I think the difference with these, the pre-trained transformer architecture is that it's giving you a summary collated from like a bunch of different sources, hopefully a bunch of different sources. And so it's like, oh, you've read the whole internet, and now these are the top 3 you think, versus like the top 3 that were on this page that you decided to like feature in the one box. It's like, I know, I don't know, I trust it for him. I got at least for me,
right? But I think I haven't heard yet of a kind of a credible way that the transformer architecture can be mapped to a rooting in factual information.
Correct. I think that's a challenge, right? But like,
not saying it can't be done.
That doesn't feel unsolvable, right? Like that somehow that feels easier than what's already been done, right?
Yeah.
Like that's like, I think if you had told me a year ago that I would have a conversation, like a credible conversation with like a chat bot on like interesting stuff, I probably wouldn't have believed you.
Right.
And now if you tell me, oh, a year from now, this chatbot can cite its sources, I'm like, yeah, okay, I trust you. Like that seems reasonable, right? Like that doesn't feel like a huge leap from where we are. And again, like this is the challenge of AI, right? Like that could be super hard and we're going to like beat our head against this thing and like be super frustrated. But it doesn't feel like my priors for like what AI can do tomorrow have totally changed. Really in the last 18 months, something like that, right?
Mostly because of what we've seen with ChatGPT.
Yeah, Transformers
GPT-3.
Originally. Yeah, GPT-3 I think was the first. I mean, I'm impressed with these. I'm impressed with the diffusion models as well, like all the image generation stuff. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm less creative as a human, and so like like generative art like seems really cool, but like less personally useful, right? Versus I think that like language is the medium through which we program humans, right? Like that, like people are like, oh, prompt engineering is going to fade. And I'm like, well, I get prompt engineered by my wife every day. Like, I don't like how, like, why is it going to fade? Like that seems pretty important, like, and so I think about like this language stuff is so personally interesting because it feels like, understanding, like, well, and maybe I'm wrong, right? But I do feel that like a disembodied intelligence that understands language, like, could be like generally intelligent, in a way that I think a disembodied intelligence that understands pixels but not language, like, maybe might not be, or definitely differently, like a dog versus a robot. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm just fast. Like I think that chat, like originally like GPT-3 and then 3.5 and then chat, I think have been just like fascinating to watch. And the speed at which this stuff is like evolving is kind of insane. Like I remember playing with like GPT-3 and being like, this is incredible.
Right.
And then it was like a blink of an eye and it was like 3.5. It's like, oh my God, this is even better. It was like ChatGPT came out. I was like, holy crap. Like this is so cool.
And I've heard that this GPT-4 has been teased a bunch and a bunch of people have seen some demos and it's supposed to be super impressive. Have they talked about timelines on when kind of that'll be more generally available?
I think sooner than we think is my guess.
Like weeks or months or something.
That's my hunch, right? Sooner than we think. And I think honestly, my hunch is that it hasn't been released yet because of these kind of like, it's more the kind of alignment and human feedback issues versus like it needs more time to train. That's my hunch, right? Because you see these things like, being like, subtly threatening to humans. And it's like, oh, we don't want that to happen. It's like, but yeah, what I've heard of like kind of the hearsay of people who claim to have experienced it, they're just like, oh my God, this is like the leap from 3 to 4 is even greater than from 2 to 3, which seemed like, mind blowing.
And is it your belief from a Google perspective that Google is going to be caught flat-footed with this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that, Lambda, I think, and Palm and all these things are like fascinatingly powerful. I worry. I think they just have to rethink about like how much they're willing to sacrifice of the old guard of their business model in order to win in the new thing.
Right.
And, the innovators, whatever the innovator's dilemma or the challenge, the innovator's challenge or whatever is like a real thing for every business, right? Like at first you're the underdog, and so you're willing to try everything, and then you're like the big gorilla, and your willingness to try things like is more scary, right? Because you're like, oh shit, I tried this thing and I could endanger this other thing, et cetera, right? So,
I mean, when ChatGPT gives you some hallucination or bogus information, you're just like, haha, that was funny.
That's
or,
right.
Hey, it's just beta or whatever.
That's right.
And if you have Google giving you the wrong information, you're like, wow, I no longer trust the search engine. And has huge economic implications.
That has huge economic implications. But then the counterfact of that is like at some point ChatGPT gives you the right info.
Yeah.
And then, what do you do then? Right. It's so I think that's right. It's like there's the risk of endangering the golden egg or whatever increases. And so your willingness to do risky shit goes down, but risky shit is the only way that you win the next battle, right? And so like, how do you balance these things? It's really hard, right? I think the larger organizations are, and the more people there are kind of like opining on those decisions, actually the harder it becomes, right? Because like you can make a good argument to launch this thing or to not launch it, and you can have that, like who breaks the tie and it's I don't envy Sundar in the current iteration of like the stuff that's happening inside of Google, but it's also like a fascinating place to see the world from. And I do think that like, in some sense, I think there's an argument that like the these models, in some sense, they're a function of like the amount of data you have and the amount of compute, like dollars of compute training you can spend to train them things. And so, in that light, like Google's in a fantastic position, right? Like it has an insane amount of data and like more data than OpenAI and probably more than Microsoft, because it has access to like Gmail data and calendar data and all this stuff. Like, and again, like there's ethics questions and all that. Like we can put all those, like they're not to be discounted, right? Like there's a bunch of data that's like pretty private, right? Like the inside of my Google Drive files or whatever, right? But, Google has access to that data in the way that Microsoft doesn't, because a lot of Exchange installations are still on-prem and people are keeping files on desktops, et cetera. So like, and it has like these massive data centers that, they serve their search stuff from. So like, in some sense, the puzzle pieces are like very much in their favor. But then the question is just like, okay, well, do you risk the thing you don't want to risk to try this other thing? It's like,
I would say, my view on this is that we have to figure out if it's, kind of to think about the Clay Christensen sustaining versus disruptive innovation.
Yeah.
And is this a sustaining innovation or is this a disruptive innovation?
Yeah.
And I think I'm landing a little bit more on it being a sustaining innovation, which means it's not so much of it's not the kind of thing that I think Google is unaware of as interesting.
I agree.
Like they know it's interesting. In fact, I think 7 or 8 of the authors of the Transformer paper were all Google research and DeepMind, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Or Google Brain or what, I forget.
Yeah, Google Brain. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
our buddy Noam is on that.
Yeah.
On the paper.
He's doing
he's a character.
Yeah. But it's kind of a, it's something that Google has cared about. And I wonder if what's really the sequence that's going to play out here is, we've seen ChatGPT that is very interesting. It's kind of GPT 3.5.
Yep.
And I think we're going to see GPT 4 get released.
Yep.
Because it just has to at some point.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I think Google will wait until GPT 4 is released
to see
and confirm kind of what it looks like, what it feels like, what the blowback is.
Yeah.
And then I think we'll see Google make its move after we see GPT 4, and then it can sort of be posed in response to that, or in sort of with the defense instead of.
Yeah, I think. And by the way, I am not worried that Google can build a, like, I guess let me put it this way. Like I think my prior that Google can build a better like chat, like pre-trained transformer chat architecture than OpenAI, like more than 50-50 chance that they can do that, right?
Yeah.
I think the real threat is that like it probably disrupts their business model in this like really fundamental way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the harder choice to make.
Yep.
Right? Because I think if Google could release this thing that's better than ChatGPT, 4 or whatever, right? But then okay, and now its revenue goes to, whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly
scary,
a
right?
potential that the revenue goes down because of that.
That's right.
I think there's also a potential that the revenue goes up.
That's right.
Because when you bake things into an answer that doesn't necessarily cite its sources, you actually have the privilege to hide the source.
That's right.
Whether it's organic or paid.
Potentially, but I think there's a question of trust in that point as well. That's are you giving me the answer? Are you giving me the best answer? Or are you giving me the answer that's paying the most?
But I mean, if you query Google for flowers today, you get all commercial query results. All ads in the first page. Both the skyscrapers and the main content.
Yeah, I guess the question for me is if I asked you what the best place to buy flowers are, you probably wouldn't give me the place. I mean, maybe that's not true, right? I've traveled and you're oh, I need to buy a suit. It's oh, my cousin's suit shop, it's okay. Right. So no different, right? In some sense, right? Yeah. We might all have a second order. All right. So I want to learn about this Nostr. Okay. Yeah. Tell me about Nostr.
Okay. So
how does this work?
This is one of the things I'm excited about is that I think it's just crazy different from an architecture perspective.
Okay.
So when we look at things like the GPTs, those are new architectures that are well understood by the incumbents.
Yep.
The thing about Nostr that I think is exciting is it's just a wildly new architecture that is not understood by the incumbents. Nobody's paying attention.
Interesting.
And so the core of it is, and I think I asked you to come unprepared.
Yes,
so
I'm a total noob. Yeah, I've literally I didn't know how to pronounce a thing. So
very
I've
smart
done no research.
Technologist, but no idea what Nostr is. So
zero idea.
That's the recipe here for hopefully a good discussion.
If you told me it was a baby vampire, I would believe you.
So we've sort of had for a long time these, the general web architecture for publishing is you start with a web browser and you access a front end through DNS that points to a specific website, and that website generates a front end and it pulls data from its own database typically, and that kind of database and front end are very tightly coupled.
Yep.
That's just typical web stuff.
Yep.
And I think we've seen a lot of attempts to do these very peer-to-peer, everybody runs their own server.
Yep.
And those things, for a bunch of reasons, mobile, you can't run persistent servers on mobile phones. And a lot of people don't like to run their own servers or understand how that works even.
Yep.
And so there's sort of the fully peer-to-peer option, which is not workable and doesn't, not usable.
Yep.
And so Nostr kind of takes this very middle road approach to this problem. And it says there's a bunch of dumb relays.
Okay.
And all a relay does is it accepts a signed message and it'll serve it to whoever asked for it. Okay. And you do typical PKI, public infrastructure signing. So, private public key pairs.
Yep.
So you can sign a message as from Yanda.
Yep.
And then you can broadcast your public key anywhere. And then people can go to relays that they think you've published to and they can pull your messages down.
Mm-hmm.
And if
peer-to-peer with caching, is that a bad analogy? Or?
Yeah, I think I'd hesitate to call it peer-to-peer because the clients don't need to run the relays.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Got it. So basically it's you dump messages kind of what is that? What was that thing people did in physical space where they were caching or something?
Geocaching.
Geocaching. Yeah. It's like geocaching on the internet. Yeah. Basically, you're hiding messages.
Yeah. Well,
people can
hopefully you don't hide it. Hopefully you sort of place it there. And you tell people, hey, if you want to get my stuff, you can get it at any of these 8 places I put it.
Okay.
So it's not that the goal isn't to put it in one place.
Got it. You want to put it in multiple places.
Put it wherever you want.
Got it.
In a bunch of places.
Yeah.
And you can verify that it's from me. So it wasn't tampered with.
Yep. Okay. That's cool.
So what it means is you have now an ecosystem where those front ends or a mobile app does not control the data that it's rendering.
Right.
It pulls it from these relays.
Yeah.
And anybody who wants
and it could pull from multiple relays as well,
relays,
right? Yeah. So you basically have search over these relay networks where people are dumping messages, and you essentially have kind of separated the front end and the back end.
Yep. And
stuff.
It's very it's kind of an ecosystem of voluntarism, right? Like just like, I want to
Yeah.
run a relay, I'm going to run it. I can do it myself. I can show up and not run a relay and just use whatever's out there. If
Yeah.
I get more cautious or I feel like somebody's going to censor me or take my stuff down, I can
move it to somewhere else, etc.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
and you can always
really
pull
cool.
from multiple relays. You can always publish to multiple relays. You don't have to publish to the same ones you pull from. You can read and write to different relays.
Yep.
It's totally just...
That's cool. And so so for, I guess, two questions. One, like, what type of messages? Like, can you post a video or is it like short form text? Like, how does this?
Yeah, it's designed around text.
Okay.
But of course, text can point to video hosted somewhere else.
Got it.
So the way it actually works is people run like media servers that are, and it's all voluntary hobbyist stuff, right?
Yeah.
But people run media servers. Like there's one that's kind of common called Nostr.build.
Okay.
So if you want to upload a photo, like a profile photo to be used in like a social networking application, you can go to Nostr.build, upload your profile photo, and then you get a link, and you can add that link to the client, and then it will render the photo for you.
And is that photo signed? Because you could tamper with the media, right? Like I could add a mustache to your profile photo without tampering with a link, and then you'd be like, "Oh shit, I've posted this thing. It's signed as me. It's pointing to this thing that Yanda's like hacked and like put a monocle on you or something."
It's a good question. It all comes down to sort of how the profiles get constructed by the clients.
Yeah.
And so if I am representing that I'm, at a place, I am this public key.
Yep.
Then I can say this is the URL that has the profile picture that goes with this public key.
Right.
And I can sign that.
Yes.
And so you can take that thing and alter it, but it's not going to show up as part of that. It's not going to show up as part of the profile attached to that public key.
But it could, right? Like, so imagine a situation like you post, you put your profile photo on Nostr.build, you sign this message. It's like, this is my profile photo. Right.
Yep.
And then you put that on a bunch of relays.
Yep.
So now it's out there.
Yep.
Right. And I'm like, I'm going to go like doctor your profile photo.
Yep.
But your message that you posted that signed as you said, like, this is my profile photo. Now I stuck a monocle on a mustache. And
but I signed it with my private key.
Yeah. So you can yank it? Or
you can read, you can use my public key and read that I signed it with my private key.
Correct.
But if you take it and modify it, you won't be modifying the version that I've signed with my private key.
So you sign the photo as well?
Well, you sign any message.
Got it.
One message might be like, we'd have to look at the profile or the protocol spec for the specifics on how profiles are constructed. But at a high level, it's like I say that this is my public key, and this is I sign probably a message. I probably don't sign the image itself, but I sign a pointer to the image that's all text-based, that's kind of at the protocol layer.
Yeah, so I think the question, though, is like, if there's a pointer to that image and I can doctor, if I can doctor like the data that resides at that pointer, I don't have to edit.
So
I don't have
if
to
you
edit
control the Nostr.build server,
correct,
then you can do the monocle.
I can
prank.
do the monocle.
So I have to trust the Nostr.build server is not going to grant you access to doing that.
Got it.
And if they do,
yeah,
I can just sign a new message that
says,
right.
That's like, ignore this one.
Ignore that one. The
but I think
now here.
Why not just sign the media message as well, right? Because you could sign the media message with your private key as well, like the actual image, your profile photo, and then like that prank doesn't work,
right?
Because I can't doctor it because it's encrypted, without knowing your private key. And then,
my guess is the reason it works the way it does today is because there's a goal right now to try to keep the relays like very simple and as dumb as possible and as lightweight as possible.
That makes sense.
So if you want to keep it all just text, and any media serving needs to come from somewhere else. And like, there's ways to handle it by just signing the messages and storing the messages and the pointers.
Cool. Yeah.
And then you don't have to really...
Feels like at some point people will just sign every message, right? Like that's a safer thing, right? If I'm if I'm recording a video of some like crime happening in Syria or something like that, I probably want to be like, this whole video is now encrypted with my key.
Yeah. So
it hasn't been edited by some, whatever, like antagonist that's trying to like send a different message or something.
Yeah.
And I feel like with deepfakes and stuff like this, that becomes like even more important, right? Because it's like, in some sense, it's like, this is my State of the Union, but if I can hack the video, it's like, well, did you actually say that thing or not? But if I encrypt the video, it's like, the president signed this State of the Union video with their private key. Like I know that is like,
Yep.
unless I can, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
fascinating.
So this is just beginning.
Yeah,
So like
this is really cool.
everything is super raw and
Mhm,
like
mhm.
it's hobbyists and hackers and it's got
That's
this
cool.
real, it's all public domain.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
no,
which is kind of what you want. In
It's
this
exactly what you
situation.
want.
Yeah, it's what you want in this situation.
and so it's all super raw and underexplored. So these media servers, it's not like these have been developed for years and years and like all
Right.
of these are worked out. I think
Yeah.
the proposal you're making that a piece of media should be signed, I think, that kind of thing to make sure that even if it has to be moved to another media server or something, that kind of thing seems to make sense. My guess is as long as you sign the pointers and as long as you can change the pointers at the protocol layer, maybe that doesn't become a problem. But maybe if people are trying to deep fake your video, you need to verify that it came from who it came from, and that's a good way to do that.
Yeah.
But those
This is
are
cool.
Yeah, those are all like more advanced versions of
this
basic
of where this goes. Yeah. That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So how did this get started? Like what's the story? Like when did this start? What's this? Yeah, like walk me through like the evolution of this thing.
So there's it was created by a pseudonym.
Okay. Yeah.
As you might
that makes
expect.
sense. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Who I think he was a Bitcoin core developer.
Okay.
It has a lot, it's not coupled to Bitcoin, but it has a lot of like philosophically aligned ideas.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And so his name is Fiat Jaf.
Okay.
I don't know if it's like Fiat JAF.
Okay. Weird.
Or
okay.
But I hear people say it Fiat Jaf.
Okay.
Cool. But I think it came about a year and a half, 2 years ago.
So it's new. It's quite
newish.
New. Yeah, newish. Yeah.
And he has like a GitHub repo up, and he kind of explains it. He sort of couches it within the context of like a, like how to decentralize Twitter.
Yeah.
This sort of some of what the repo describes. So I think people come to it and think of this as like, oh, this is how you decentralize Twitter, and like it is that, but it's more than just that.
Yeah, that feels like not the first thing I would try to do with it.
Oh, what would be the first thing you would try?
I mean, I actually really think that this like deepfake thing is going to be not a thing until it's like a massive thing,
right?
Yep. Like to the point that like, unless things are signed, I'm not going to trust them.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the very near future, right? Like I think like the quality of deepfakes is getting so good, and I think particularly if you don't need to do video, like if it's just audio messages, like I can record something that sounds like you saying like wild shit you don't believe in, and just be like, David King said this, and you're like, oh my God, like I know he did not, right?
Right.
And so I think identity protection, right? Like basically like the things I say are going to be signed in some way that I can prove that they came from me.
Yep.
I think that's going to become like very important, like very like sooner than we think is my hunch, right? And I think about this more as like like, I mean, I think people look at Twitter and they're like, oh, it's like offends some group or represses some other group, et cetera. Like maybe, but like, it's not a state actor, right? So it's like, it's not gonna, Twitter's not gonna come to your house and like put you in a gulag or something like that, right? Like it's highly unlikely.
Right.
So I'm less worried about that as like, and then like, I don't know, it's like people can kind of say whatever they want on Twitter and follow whoever. And I don't know. I was like, I also, maybe this is my own personal bias. Like, I think Twitter's a really interesting thing. I spent a lot of time on it, but it's like, its value to like the survival of society as a whole, like I probably don't think is as high as some people who are on Twitter a lot think.
Right.
But I do think that like a future where you can't trust that the thing that I sent you is me.
Yep.
That actually is like really bad for society.
Yep.
Like it's just generally like really bad.
Totally.
Right. Like I think in general, like social norms and all this stuff are like kind of built on like a foundation of trust, and like the fact that like, I can, you can record this thing, I can play it and be like, okay, yeah, that was you,
right.
know?
So I would agree with the assessment that those are the most important use cases to serve.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard to like instigate those use cases. So the reason that I don't think like a Twitter clone is like the most interesting thing you can do with it, but I do think it helps to just have a water cooler around which the people who care about this can like gather to talk about it and talk about the progress of development, or hey, I'm launching a new feature on a relay. Why don't we make the protocol do this instead of that? So it becomes a little bit like it's not so much about the censorship. It's not like people are coming because they're like, oh, I need censorship resistance today because Twitter's shutting me down. It's more like, I don't like the way the algorithm doesn't show me tweets from people I care about seeing. Like, and they're just like,
but I would put it in other places. I'd put it in email attachments. I would put, I would kind of start to put this stuff in other places, because I think what you're going to find is that like when this event happens where you can no longer trust things, like that will also be true of stuff in the past. Right. Like the minute I can deepfake you, I can deepfake that attachment that you sent like 2 years ago and be like, oh man, I don't trust that thing anymore either. Right. It's like, And so actually like the sooner you start and you're like, oh, starting from now on, like all of these messages that I sent to you are encrypted with my private key. You decrypt them in this way. You can pull them from like a bunch of different places. If somebody censors me, you can pull it from a different place, etc. I think it's good to kind of start laying that groundwork, because then you can be like, okay, well, at least this stuff I know came from you. Like that's.
Well, I mean that is the groundwork that's laid today, right?
Yeah,
like
it's awesome.
I sign message. Effectively, I'm using this client called Damus. It's like an iOS app. Went through the App Store approval process. Cool. It's not like decentralized. It's
but it doesn't need to be, right? Because like it's pulling from a backend or multiple backends or whatever. Yeah.
And so, but with Damus, every time I post a note, which is kind of the equivalent of a tweet, it's using my private key that it's managing for me to sign that note. And so it is publishing out to, I think I use, I don't know, dozen or more relays today. And so it is publishing my content in a way that anybody who wants can read it and verify that it came from me. It just happens to be that like the style of organization
looks like tweets,
feels like a water cooler. It feels like a chat room, like a big chat room.
Right? But I think, does it have like direct messages and stuff like this as well?
It does. They're a little problematic, but
because I feel like, I mean, in some sense, like I would want, chat this way. Like it's not necessary, like, I guess, again, for me, like I'm more private maybe. So like publishing isn't necessarily where I like broadcast publishing would maybe not be where I go. But I would want this, like if I send you something of importance, like I would want to send it to you in this way that it's like kind of protected, like without telling the whole world or whatever, but it's like still valuable. Like it's, I feel like I would trust that more than like just sending you a body of a clear text email.
And I think it can achieve that eventually. I think the thing that it's really good at that nobody's done before is how do you publish something and make it relatively censorship resistant? Like, signing private messages among people. I think like Signal does a reasonable job at that. I think there's people who have concerns with their approach to it, but I think signing private messages, there's like those, like I think Threema is an app that does a much better job at that, but is much less popular.
Well, I think the challenge though is if you're putting that message only in one spot, like there's still some threat back. Like I like the idea of like you sign this thing and then you deploy it in a bunch of places, and then the thing that reads it might actually fetch that message from like 6 different places and be like, okay, if all 6 of these messages match, like not only are they signed, but they're also all the same. You know, like that's probably good to show you, right? Like, okay, it hasn't been tampered, someone who has a quantum computer somewhere trying to decrypt this keys like hasn't fucked with all of the versions of this thing.
I mean, the problem with private messaging today on Nostr, and I think this probably can be solved. I don't know all the details of the proposed solutions, but I think people aren't racing towards it yet. But the problem is if I take your public key and I ask for all of your DMs, the relays will
give them to you.
And so I can see all the metadata. I can see that DK and Yanda were communicating, and I can see that there were all these messages, but I can't read the messages because they're signed. So I think you'd probably have to do something like, I would sign a message
with my private key and your public key.
Well, with your public key, so that only your private key can
your private key and my public key, so that...
And I can put it out on a relay.
You can put it on a relay and be like, it's exactly.
Really make sense of what it is.
Yeah.
And like...
That's kind of interesting.
There's extra layers of work and protocol, bloat and probably relay bloat. And so... Because private messaging is like solved in other ways, I don't think there's been a race towards solving it. Though there are DM features that kind of solve this. And most of the popular clients have DM features. They're just like not super private yet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think there are paths to get there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, for kind of more global publishing, it makes that's
the global publishing thing is like an idea that's been
it's kind of
exciting for a long time,
Yeah.
and there haven't been really good credible solutions to it. And now I think we have the beginnings of what a credible solution might look like.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what everybody's excited about. And then the private, I mean, I would love to see the private use cases get solved. I mean, I would love to see a future where we have like interoperable messaging.
Totally.
Like there's no reason, like if you want to use Signal and I want to use WhatsApp.
Totally, why not?
We can't do that today.
That's right. Yeah.
You have to be on the same messaging service as your counterparty. Whereas like, what if I
Why?
want to use like an interface to messaging where I can pull like my Slack work DMs and my,
that'd be cool.
you know, private messages and like some publishing like DMs from Twitter plus, you know, WhatsApp and Signal messages plus Slack.
Yep.
And if I want to use that, I can do that. And if you don't want all that in the same place, you can have like a different interface and we can still communicate with each other. And you can be like, oh, I don't want any notice from DK,
I mean, in some sense, like email is beautiful still because it allows for this, right? Like I can use Gmail and you can use Outlook and we can have a nice chat or whatever, you know, Thunderbird or whatever your you know, Emacs mail or something is your thing of choice, and it still works.
And I think why can't email be replaced? Like if we solve these DM issues and we think of DM as messaging, but like why doesn't email also get solved in a similar way?
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I like this. I'll go play with it.
So to some of your you were talking about sort of this AI future where Bitcoin gets used as a kind of a currency or sort of a value exchange among intelligent kind of agents.
That they could use this to communicate with each other, right? In some sense, in a way that like validates that it's like actually coming from them.
Yeah. Well, and so I think today there's not much overlap between Nostr and any of the AI stuff. I'd say like Nostr's extreme at decentralizing publishing and not very AI relevant. And then AI is almost like a very centralizing force.
Yes.
For the most part, like, you know, training sets and compute and it just has like natural, you know, capital expenditures required. But I think there's like, you know, as the world of technology is, each of these things gets better, they probably have some, you know, convergence and overlap and they run into each other. But I think what's happening today in Nostr is already a bit of the flavor of what you're suggesting with Bitcoin. And so, you know, sort of, we were talking about the history. So Fiat Jaff, you know, created this thing, I don't know, 2 years ago or something. And it's been pretty slow, you know, progress, but, you know, healthy, organic, but, you know, slow. I'd say one of the big instigating moments was Jack Dorsey made a donation of, I think, 14 Bitcoin to the project back in December.
Okay.
Which also brought a lot of social consensus on. So we were like, oh, let's check this thing out. So people started downloading the clients. Damus has been making like a ton of progress. And so it actually feels, you know, not quite the same as like a Twitter level polish, but like pretty good for kind of one main guy. JB55 works on it kind of nonstop. And he's also a Bitcoin core developer.
Okay, cool.
You know, in a past life, I think he just spends all his time on Damus now.
Nice.
But it has like a lot of that ethos from both the protocol layer and the most popular client so far.
Yeah.
But the kind of Bitcoin related thing here is that running these relays actually costs money.
Yeah.
So if you run a relay, you have storage, compute, bandwidth.
Totally.
Like somebody pays, and that's hobbyists today.
Yep.
So hobbyists just, you know, I think I had a guy I interviewed like last week. I think he said it was like $5 a day or something for, you know, a Raspberry Pi, and you could run one of these things.
Yep.
And then as your relay starts getting bigger, your costs increase. I thought I heard somebody say something $300 a day or $300 a month. I forget what the numbers were. But those things actually have a real cost, and so that cost probably should be charged to
the people who are storing the messages on it, right?
Yeah.
Like ideally, you pay rent to host your stuff.
Yep.
There, right?
Yeah.
Like in the same way that I pay Google Drive and Dropbox rent to store my files.
Right. But of course, these, you know, you can't go to 1600 Amphitheater Parkway and get the bank details.
No, exactly. That's what, so Bitcoin or exactly.
Yeah.
Some kind of token seems.
Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin is a logical token given the fact that like it's
indeed
sort of neutral instead of, you know, created as part of this protocol.
Totally. I like that. Yeah.
And actually because of the kind of, you know,
pseudonymous nature and protect. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And because of the sort of the history of where this came from, you know, everybody's, you know, been in Lightning development and played around with Lightning. I don't know if you've used any Lightning wallets. And
Yeah.
So like Damus has a Lightning integration where you can connect a Lightning address to your profile.
Yep.
And then people can just tip you.
Yes.
So today it's kind of just for fun, right?
Yeah.
There's a thing called Zaps, which are coming out, so Damus is effectively like a Twitter clone, right?
Yep.
Zaps are instead of a like or a thumbs up or heart or whatever they do, there's like a free shaka is the emoji they use, the reaction. But there's also a new thing coming. It's only on the test flight.
You can pay people.
And you can zap people real money. And so what if you could actually see, like I want to see the trending list of all of the notes, right? The tweets that have received the most zaps and like with, anti-spam and like self-dealing.
Cool. Yeah, that feels like so that's cool in some sense that like then it's like, oh, you reward the content that is most interesting.
Yeah.
But I think there's also this, you could go down the path where it's like, okay, well, per message per day or per message per month, you want to host it on this server.
Yep.
It costs you X, Satoshi or whatever. Yep. And if you want to host it on multiple servers because it gives you more protection, then, you multiply your cost by X, whatever.
So these experiments have begun. So as you can imagine, relays out on the internet are going to get spammed and you're going to get all kinds of nonsense on it.
Makes sense, yeah.
So these experiments that you're suggesting are the very earliest days. Yeah. But just I'd say like a few weeks ago, I think they really started to become popular. And so there's the concept of paid relays. Mm-hmm. And there's certain relays today that will only carry your messages if you pay them. Yeah. And it's so raw that you just you pay them 5,000 sats one time and they just carry your messages indefinitely. Who knows?
Yeah, it's a good start. Yeah,
but it's a fine starting point. But you could imagine, monthly subscriptions, which I think are part of, if I recall hearing this correctly, I think Bolt 12 is a Lightning protocol spec that's going to enable subscriptions with Lightning.
Yeah, or per message fees.
Yeah, per message fees.
Just delete the message if you haven't paid, right? That's fine. Yeah. That seems totally reasonable.
Yeah. But you got all these uncoordinated actors between relays and clients and users who all are exchanging real value. Yeah. And now you've got Bitcoin Lightning available to help.
Who's using it today? Mostly hobbyists, I take it, right?
It's mostly hobbyists. It's people building on it or people who are excited about the concept.
And Damus, DAMUS?
Yeah, Nostr, Damus.
Cool. Not Ferratu. Nostr Ferratu.
You can launch a client.
It's kind of hoping,
But I think it goes to your point about these future AI agents that would also get paid. Meaning in San Francisco to buy coffee, we don't really need Bitcoin. It's fine. That's right. But it's the Visa rails work fine enough for now.
Yes, exactly.
I can imagine a future where that doesn't make sense, but it's not like we're on the cusp of that.
I feel like that future would be for us as humans, even we're in the mode where we have to pay Bitcoin for coffee, so many worse things have happened to us. A lot of things have gone real bad, right? Yeah. But I think for an AI to pay for its virtual coffee or whatever, or it's its own electricity to whatever, that seems totally fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Or even I don't know if you pay for any of the things I think Midjourney, once you go beyond a certain number of image requests, you have to be a subscriber.
Yeah.
You can imagine just some random website that pops up and you just throw it some Satoshis to generate the thing and you don't have to have a long-term relationship with it.
That's right. Exactly.
And then that could go to the compute training costs. It could go to the developers of the thing.
I think it's useful only if then that server can then use the Satoshi for something, it's oh, cool. Now I can,
right.
I can pay for my own computer, my server, et cetera. And I like the idea of AI, I think we're going to get to some point where these intelligence agents are going to communicate with each other as well, right? They're going to need to validate that they are who they are, right?
Yep.
So,
do you think that do you have a sense or a hypothesis around how that might bootstrap? What are the first use cases where that becomes important? I could imagine, those email completions that you get in Gmail. That's sounds good, okay, no problem. It's well, you could actually use a GPT transformer language to help construct a real email that's in my voice that has reasonable options.
That's already starting to happen actually. Ghostwriter and Hyperwrite and a few other things are trying to do this, which I love it. I think it's really cool.
But I could have my email talk to your email in our own voices.
I think it might be more. I think it might be more basic than that. It's like, oh, the refrigerator is going to talk to the,
right.
whatever, the power station because it needs, like, I don't know. Like, so stuff like where it's like
right.
the humans are not involved. Like they're not proxying as agents for us. They're just like doing their own shit, because like, I don't know, like, so we have this yard, our dogs like bark to the dogs next door, and they're back and forth. They're not talking about us. They're not doing that on our behalf. They're just having a fucking chat, like they're like, I think once these agents become like intelligent enough,
right,
they're going to have conversations about shit that we don't know about, don't care about, make no sense. Just for the heck of it. Right. And like form societies and have like, mores and all this other stuff. But like, I think as part of this is like, oh, if like Robot Bob tells Robot Jane, like, let's go watch a robot movie, like they're going to want to know that like, it's actually that came from Bob.
Right.
And like, it's like, and I think what are they going to talk about? Like, I don't know when dogs talk about the neighbor dogs, like, and they're less intelligent than I think these things might be. So I'm going to talk about all kinds of like weird shit that humans can't make sense of, I think, right? That's do
you have a sense of like the time frames around which, like, is it going to get weird 3 months from now, 6 months from now? Is it going to get weird like 2 years from now, 10 years from now?
I would say the likelihood that it gets weird in our lifetime is 100%. And I would not have said that like 2 years ago. I think beyond that, like, I don't know. I'm really bad at like I think gauging like time frames is much. Yep. But I did not think, I thought I would die before seeing like AGI. I don't think that anymore. So yeah, I think shorter than that, like, I don't know. It's really hard to.
Is AGI kind of a singularity moment in your mind? Like everything just kind of takes off.
In a
hard.
I think so. Well, I think it's not going to be a hard takeoff, but it's going to be a weird takeoff. Like I actually think that like our lives, there's not going to change that much, except that like now we have this other entity that inhabits the world that is like as or maybe more intelligent than us that also does shit. Yeah, I don't know. Like I don't think we become ants, right? But I do think that like it gets weird. You have an interaction with an agent that's also having interactions with other agents that are independent of you and weird and making its own societies and all this other stuff. Like I do think that that's going to happen. Like weird shit is going to start to happen. But I'm less worried that we become like food or slaves or like it's just like, I mean, maybe it happens and they recognize that we're like fighting for resources. Like I doubt it. Like yeah, I don't know.
Is there anything in your kind of day-to-day life or kind of your, let's say, planning for your future and your family's future that you think about differently if those things happen?
I think it's hard because it's hard to know the time scale. But I do think that like work in the way that we like traditionally do it will change like pretty significantly. But in what way? Like who knows? Like and when, so it's like, yeah, I think timing this stuff is going to be really hard. And I do think that like time, it's like, there's all these stories of people who are just like, it's like, oh, if you bought the stock, then it eventually crashed. But if you stole it at the right, it's like, you can still like, like don't give up your day job yet. Right. Cause like until this stuff happens, like who knows. Right.
Right.
But I do think that like, I guess the one thing that I would tell you is like being resistant to that change is not going to help, right? Like it's going to like when it happens, it's going to happen. And so I think it's going to be like, I think there's some amount of my brain capacity that's just like, oh, at some point shit's going to get weird.
Right.
And it's just like, whatever, that'll be like, what can I do? What can you do? Like, I think I meditate for that, like, to that effect. It's like, oh, at some point, like the content of consciousness is going to get like really strange compared to what it was the day before. And I do think that like the getting weird part of it's going to happen pretty sudden.
Like that'll be a hard takeoff.
Yeah, but I don't think in the sense of like we won't understand anything around us. Like I don't think that'll be the case. Like I think it'll just be like, 80% of your day is similar and 20% is like really strange.
Mm-hmm. Have you been in a self-driving car yet?
Yeah, it's awesome, dude. I love it. I hate driving. Like,
Right.
like,
are you Waymo Cruise or?
I've done Waymo, and then I have the FSD on the Tesla.
Oh, you do?
And it's awesome. I mean, it's amazing.
Did you use it on the way over?
Yeah, yeah. I turn it on like whenever I can. It's amazing, and it's like it makes a couple mistakes where you have to take over, etc. I'm holding the steering wheel.
You're engaged. Okay.
Yeah, I'm holding the steering wheel, but it's driving.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, for sure it's driving. I mean, it's like I'm there in case it fucks up, but it's more and more rare that it fucks up.
And so you've been in Waymo in self-driving, and you've had your own car in full self-driving.
That's
and are they feel roughly equivalent or?
It's hard to tell because the Waymo one is like a kind of a known route. These Waymo things do kind of known routes.
Right.
It felt more magical to like not hold the steering wheel.
Right.
But I can use my Tesla to go anywhere I want.
Right. Right.
So like I don't know, on the margin it's kind of like I don't know, like which one would I pick? Like probably the one where.
And it's way better than autopilot?
Oh yeah.
Like it's just a whole different.
It's here, not just on the highway. Like it'll do turns and stop at stoplights and start again when the light turns green, and if a biker weaves in, it like slows down. It feels really magical. Right. Yeah, it feels, and then like when it fucks up the way like a student driver would fuck up, not a way a robot would fuck up, or like a if switch statement or something like that. It's just like, it's like, oh, it slows down to the merge like too hard. It's like, well, I did that too when I was 16, it's like, I don't know, like it doesn't feel like it's like broken. It just feels like it's like still learning how to drive, it's like, and that's kind of materially, that's a different feeling.
Do you have much opinion about there's this approach that
the LiDAR versus camera, et cetera.
Yeah, the sensors.
Well, I mean, I will say, I think in the long run, I think we do a pretty good job understanding language and understanding pixels. Like we don't need LiDAR, we don't need all this other stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, I drive making relatively few mistakes without LiDAR, right? So why can't my car,
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I'm less of a purist, right? In the sense of like, if you told me like I can add LiDAR to your vision, would you like that? I'd be like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Like let's go. Like transhuman, whatever. Like give me magnetic fields and shit. Like why not, right?
Yeah.
So I guess for me, it's like I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, like we should never use LiDAR. It's like wrong to build AI that uses LiDAR because it's like, oh, if you could build humans that use LiDAR, I'd be like, oh, let's go, But I do think that you probably can, I do feel like you can achieve full self-driving without LiDAR. But again, like I'm not a self-driving car expert, so like take all this shit with a grain of salt. But like, like the humans are proof of existence in that sense, right? It's like, okay, well, we do it, so whatever, right? Like, but also like humans don't know that I should take this exit because there's a traffic jam 6 miles away,
right?
And so like this route that is generally longer is now shorter, but like, man, I like that my that my autonomous driving system can do that, right?
Right.
Like, can it do that with just vision? And no, right? Obviously not.
Connectivity
Right?
to the internet. It doesn't need LiDAR, right?
That's right. No, it doesn't need LiDAR, but it has this thing that like the proof of existence in humans doesn't have, right? Like, which is like it knows the traffic conditions like 6 miles away.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's a net negative. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So like if LiDAR gives it another superpower that I can think of in the proof of existence humans, I'm like, stick that thing in. Let's go. Like I don't know.
Giddy up.
Yeah. So
I got in my first.
Do you need it? No, but like I think
I got in my first Waymo kind of self-driving, autonomously driven vehicle maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, like very recently.
Yeah.
And it felt to me kind of like when I got into my first Uber, back when it was like a black car and
totally.
You're like,
whoa,
I just dispatched
this is different.
My phone. That was wild, right?
Yeah.
And then over time, sort of that became norm, and then it became optimized, and it became kind of a crappy experience.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah, it kind of devolves to the mean. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Like
but
the
it's
early,
still kind of awesome. I mean, it's still better than taxi,
right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
I think
that's where the marginal cost is. So it's like as long as it's better than a taxi.
Right. I mean, I wonder, I wonder how many of these kinds of things are like, how much is, I don't know, is Uber going to still exist in a meaningful way if these self-driving cars achieve what they intend to achieve?
Well, I think some ride sharing will exist. Now, is it going to be Uber or not? Like that, I don't. Right. But in some sense, like if self-driving cars exist, like ride sharing becomes more popular, right? Because
Right.
like,
But who controls it? Because does Waymo run away with this, or is it a Waymo Cruise battle instead of an Uber Lyft battle?
maybe, or it becomes, it actually there's more of these things because over time, like Waymo has more fun selling the technology to a bunch of people, and you get to marginal costs, like the same way that like there's a bunch of taxi companies until
right.
Who controls pizza restaurants in San Francisco? Well, like no one, but like it's fine. You can still get a good
Right.
pizza, and those restaurants are still doing fine, right? So,
Right.
It becomes like every time we toast bread, it's like magical, right? And yet, like there's no like master monolith of toaster companies
Right,
that makes all the toasters, right? Like I think you get to this point where like if the technology commoditizes, it actually becomes more of a competitive market over time, which means more players.
Yep.
And so I think this idea of like, I mean, there maybe is a path where Waymo controls it all, but I just don't think that doesn't seem like the proximate future. Actually, I think the algorithms are becoming more commoditized as we get there, right? And so I think that probably lends itself to like more competition and more value getting distributed to the end consumer as opposed to the provider of the service.
Right.
I certainly feel that way for most AI things. I mean, like, I think when DALL-E came out, I was like, oh, OpenAI is going to win this thing. But like, then Stable Diffusion comes out and it's like, oh, actually, it's going to be like kind of an interesting fight. And I think like the more these players there are, the better for us. Like, like a lot of this value gets like kind of pushed out to the end consumer.
Yep.
And that's why I think about like this notion of like, I think in an AGI world, like we may not need to work, right? Like, or certainly we won't work in the way that we're currently working because so much value has been pushed out to like the edges, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
a wild.
It's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be fun for sure.
And it's like it's cool that it's happening in our lifetime. It's like I feel very lucky. I kind of feel like the farmer at the edge of the industrial revolution.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, shit's gonna get weird. It's like I'm still gonna farm every day. But like, there's a city over there, it's smoke. It's like that's fucking weird, like the farmer didn't disappear, right?
Yeah.
But like his life got strange, and like our life's gonna get strange. That's kind of cool. Like
that's
I like
that.
Yeah. I'm like still gonna have to tend to my plow and my chickens and stuff, but like over there, that's like what the fuck, Like I don't know. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Cool.
Well,
this is fun. I'm glad we got a chance to hang and talk about a bunch of these.
Thanks for teaching me about Nostr.
Yeah.
Nostr. I'm going to download.
Download Damus and give it a try, or there's plenty of web clients and all kinds of stuff to.
I'm going to do that right now.
Yeah.